charge for it. I've never charged, never will, and people shouldn't charge. It's just if they're charging you for it, you're more likely that they're not legit. Somebody that's doing it for free, and if they got a good personality and they got good intentions, and you get all the good information, that's more to be legit to help you than somebody that charges and you can't get enough info on, and they're only doing it for their own self-righteous thrills. You need to not go that way. Not at all. It's just going to make your situation worse.
Well, there's no school. There's no classes on how to be a ghost hunter. I mean, basically, a lot of people, do is somebody does the ghost hunting group, right? They create one, right, as a social gathering. Yeah. They go out and do it for a couple of years, and then they bring interns in. But originally, they just did it from, whatever. But, it's a lot. It's not regulated. And you're letting people come into your house. How do you know they're not going to steal stuff while they're in there either? They don't have insurance. So
these are all great points you're making. And I wish there was some kind of regulation or something we could do to qualify people, but there just isn't. And you make great points. I agree totally.
Oh, yeah. Then again, you don't know. You got this group out coming to your house, right? 2 weeks later, you start trying to find something and it's gone. I mean, especially the one, I can see the point. They don't want the owners in the house while they do their investigation. But you're then leaving all your private stuff, everything, there for them to snoop around with while you're gone, while they're looking for ghosts. I don't know.
Or 2 weeks later, you're on vacation. They've done scoped your house out because they've been inside on investigation.
Yeah.
They might even, think about it. Yeah. So you need to do background checks on these people best you can. Really.
Yeah, and then again, too, is your insurance company going to pay off if you got vandalized by this investigation group? They could come back and say, well, you invited these people into your house, so, we're not going to pay on your claim. I mean, it's so many different things. You got to really, like you said, you got to investigate them. Talk to some of their prior clients and see how their investigation went. Not one or two, but more than that. Before I lived with somebody in my house.
Yeah, exactly. Because all our choices have consequences that set off a chain of reaction that will go on for a while. From right down to you saying, yeah, I want you to come in. Well, that starts off a whole chain of reaction. So before you start off that chain of reaction, make sure you've got all the info you can on these people. Because, hey, look, if they're not legit or doing it for the right reasons, they're just going to make your situation worse with the spirits, and then you might come home and your valuables be gone too. And it's not because the spirits hit them or took them; it's because the people you had come in to help you made things worse and robbed you. So yeah, you don't know.
Well, last week I had a retired state police detective, who runs a group for ghost hunting. I don't know if you listened to that show that night, but
yes, I know him. He's a friend of mine. He's a hell of a good guy.
Yeah, he had one case where he first thought it maybe was the kid doing it, because they were having a problem with one of their children. But quarters would appear every day, like morning and then again at night. They would drop down from the ceiling or go throwing across the room. And this went on for a long period of time whatever they did, a cleansing. And I guess supposedly it stopped. But, manifesting actually quarters. And I guess he said there was a big bucket worth of quarters that it was, they got while they were in that house. But I mean, how could a spirit manifest something physical?
Well, they in theory, in my world, I should say, you can't prove this stuff, but they can cross parallel universe. There's no time relevance to them, so they can manifest these things if they've got strong enough power to do it and energy to do it. Again, it can't be proven. It hasn't been proven yet, but I've seen some weird stuff like that. Now, granted, 9 million out of 10 million ghosts aren't going to make you money. They're going to cost you money, usually. But, yeah, I remember that case. That was a bizarre case. It really was.
Yeah, or the one that I guess nothing was happening at the house. It was younger people in the house. I think he mentioned there was some little drug use in the house. But all of a sudden, a dog came back with a femur and some other bone. and ran up to the owners, and the owners looked at it, and they turned it over to the police. And that when they did their investigation, I guess on the backyard, there was the property line. On the other side of it, there was a cemetery. Well, I guess they did a ground penetrating radar and found out there was a bunch of bodies buried in their backyard. In other words, they built the house, and then in the backyard, there was bodies. And
yeah, I remember that case too. That was another unique case. And, that's the problem with real estate and land grabbers and greedy people. They would move cemeteries, supposed to move the bodies, but that costs a lot of money. So to cut costs, make more money, they left the bodies. So now when you've got houses on brand new houses, we've talked about this before, Gary, you got brand new houses on land, and the house is haunted to all get out, and people are like, what's going on? Well, you don't know what's underneath your house or on your land. You just don't know.
So in other words, you don't have to have a house where somebody got murdered in, or something bad happened. You could go, right? You could build your own house, or you go into a place where there's a whole bunch of houses, right, being built, and your house could be haunted and your neighbors, because there were bodies buried there, because it was a cemetery at one time back in the 1900s or 1890s or whatever. And the builders would have had known they were there. So they just kind of shifted the dirt around, covered it up, and then built the house.
Absolutely. And think about it like this. The land you're living on, it's been there forever. But even in the United States, go back 300 years, Lord knows what has happened on that land in 300 years. And think about this, too. Record keeping has only really got really good within maybe the last 100 years. Try to look up history of your land past 100 years, and it gets hard. So imagine 200 years, 300 years. Yeah, that stuff of murder, suicide, hangings, witchcraft, burning, whatever happened on your land, battles, Indian battles, who knows? There's, the records weren't kept up to snuff, especially if it was nefarious stuff going on there, and they don't want it to be known. So, yeah, who knows what's happened on your land?
Well, and if you lived in the areas like Missouri and some of those states during the Civil War, right? So when they got killed, they just basically, after the battle was over, right, people buried them right basically where they dropped. So, no records of it, nothing. They didn't really start keeping a track of records till around the 1900s, say sufficient. And even then it wasn't kept that great. And don't forget, prior to that, let's say you lived in a small town, right? Or a farming area, a town, or whatever. And let's say your wife dies, or one of your kids dies, or Aunt Bertha dies, who used to be playing the saxophone in the nudist camp, playing the sex quartet. She dies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, it was quite common, two things, right? They had a parlor, so they sat in a coffin for a day or two. That'd be eerie right there for ghosts. But then, most of the time, they would, if they owned the property and then weren't renting it, guess what? That old oak tree, a couple 100 feet from the house, they would dig an area and then they would bury that person right there on the property. There's no record of it.
Nope. And I'm going to tell you something else. I live in the Midwest, and you get, out here, and we got West Virginia and Kentucky and Virginia and Pennsylvania, Ohio. There's a long history of your relatives. There's a lot of farms and land out here. Their whole family tree is buried out in their yard. And not only that, way back in the Victorian times, when they died, they would take pictures of the dead. They'd prop them up. And if you really want to know what a dead person looks like in a picture, like you can't tell, because sometimes you can't tell, if they're standing up or sitting, look at their hands, because the blood will settle from gravity, and the hands will be real dark in the picture, black and white picture.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how you can tell that's a dead person. Like kids, whatever, they would prop them up and take pictures of them, and then they would bury them, and then they would put coins in their eyes, all kinds of Appalachian superstitions going out through here, but it's all on that land, man. I mean, you don't know what you're building on or living on anymore.
Well, like Liz, who writes a series of monster sci-fi books, right? Now, she's a good friend of mine. We chat all the time on Facebook Live, or not live, but on Facebook, on Messenger. And, she's been on the show a couple times, promoting her book. But, she told me some eerie things. She has like a little house. It has little acreage, like 30-some acres plus. Now, she was a paramedic, and then after she was a paramedic, decided to get into law enforcement. So I think 15, 16 years as a deputy sheriff. So she's very credible. But she was telling me back a few years ago, this happened. She didn't tell me this a few years ago. It told me recently that she was out somewhere, near where her horses are. I can't remember where exactly. But, it was wet. The ground was wet. It was after rain. And she looked down on her property, and here all of a sudden she thinks there's a kid walking through her property, which is kind of weird because I think she owned 37 or 39 acres. So why would a kid be walking through? Okay, there would be no reason. And he was wearing like cargo pants and a hoodie. Now, again, she was an sheriff, right? So she knows what to look for when she looks at people. I mean, they are trained to notice things.
And to take visual details. Yes.
Right. So she looked, and the kid was walking closer and closer. She couldn't recognize the face, and she thought, oh, maybe it's one of the neighbor kids or whatever. Now, there was no way off her property other than the kid or whoever it was would have had to walk past her. So she took her eye off for like a minute and then looked, and guess what? Gone. Vanished.
Gone.
So she went and checked. Again, the ground was wet. There should have been footprints. No footprints, my friends. No sign of anybody being there. Now, that was one of the things she told me. I figured that's really kind of eerie right there. Now, again, she lives in Missouri. There was a lot of battles during the Civil War in Missouri.
Yeah, there was. A lot of it. And the Indian battles, too, would fight each other and soldiers. So, yeah, there's a lot of history there.
Yeah. Now, her house is fairly new. I think maybe there was one owner before, so it wasn't an old house. Okay? So you would think, okay, it's not an old house, and she checked. Nobody ever died in it, so that ruled that out, right? But she said, when she was married, that her and her husband would not be upstairs, and all of a sudden they would hear the bedroom door open and slam shut. Okay? Wow. And then open and slam shut. They go up there, there's nobody there. And she said, again, being an ex-deputy sheriff, she looks for things, right? Can't figure out how the door could open when it's level. Yeah. Open.
Right, it latches, I'm sure.
Yeah, it latches. Opens. You have to turn the doorknob, open it, and close it. Then it started getting a little bit more worse. She'd be in the front room, and this still, I guess, is going on. Her refrigerator, the door will open, and she hears it slam shut.
Hungry ghost.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Somebody. Now, again, it could have been somebody. It died in the Indian War. Could have died from the Civil War, and that their spirit is roaming her house, and maybe they don't even know they're still dead, so they can see us, right? But we don't see them, at least majority of the time. Again, she did see that person walking, but she couldn't see their face. So, I mean, it makes me wonder if they can see us, we can't see them. They don't know they're dead. So they're going on their life like, hey, it's still going on.
Yeah, right. A lot of them don't know they're dead, and a lot of them know they're dead, but they didn't cross over for certain reasons, and there's a whole gamut of reasons and whatnots and theories, and here we are. You got a history of land that goes back 1,000 years, as far as we know, with Native Americans and whatnot, and Lord knows what has happened on land. I mean, there's a lot of bloodshed that has happened on this country that we just don't even know. Well, we really don't.
Now, some people, including that one detective I had on, we were talking, and he goes, well, it could be like a recording just playing itself over and over again. In other words, they're not alive. It's just the events are replaying. I disagree with that. Okay? Because, number one, there's no recorder there. There's nothing to cause it to play again. I kind of tend to think that maybe that last few seconds or last minute or last whatever time period of that person was alive, they're still trapped there. They never went to the light or the black. I'm not sure which way to go. I'm going to ask you that in a second. But they're trapped there.